Welcome to Personnel Matters, the official podcast of the Air Force Personnel Center. Hosted by Major General Jefferson O'Donnell.
Welcome to Personnel Matters. I am Major General Jefferson O'Donnell, Commander AFPC, and your podcast host. We're here to provide information and updates on the programs and processes at the Air Force's Personnel Center that guide your career. This podcast is also a direct line where you can reach out to me with questions, concerns, and suggestions, and more. Now, your Air Force's Personnel Center executes more than 400 programs covering the entire life cycle of Department of the Air Force military and civilian personnel. Today, we are focusing on developmental education boards, and we're going to talk about the process, why it's important, and some upcoming policy changes. And most specifically, we're going to talk about officers, but some of this applies across for our military and our civilian. So first of all, why is it important? Because one of the A1's LOEs for the Air Force is to grow future airmen. And overall, we have a responsibility given to us from Congress, a joint and DOD overall, to have professional military education to grow our force. Now, again, we're going to get into kind of the meat and potatoes specifically for the officer development education piece, but I'm going to cover that fairly quickly because that's in the PSDM that gets released. What we want to spend more of our time talking about today is what are some of the nuances of the process, and then even more importantly at the end, what's changing for academic year 27-28 that you need to know about especially if you're eligible or if you're a senior rater who's nominating officers. To help me with this today, I've got Captain Emily Willis, who's been running our DE process for a couple of years. She's actually about to leave to go on to another assignment, but we've grabbed her up for one last talk to use her expertise and observations in this process. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you, sir. Happy to be here.
So she and her team execute the Air Force A1 development education policies, aligning practices with the Chief's force development vision. She manages quota allocations and supports senior leader panels while overseeing 12 developmental education special programs. Now, as we said, we're going to talk quickly kind of about the process and kind of get through that. But one thing that's important is, again, we fit in the bigger picture of why do we do development education. Some of these are great schools, great programs. Some of them are overseas, but we all have to remember that they're based on a requirement. But some four things I kind of pull out is that what are we doing with PME? We're conveying a body of professional knowledge specific to what we do in the Department of Defense. We're establishing habits of mind and thinking that are essential to our military profession. We're helping people learn how to lead and operate in a joint environment, and then understand the national security objectives and the instruments of national power. Those are common things, and then there's a lot of other things that get put into our PME programs and a lot of different types, but that's just a reminder of why do we do PME. It's important that we develop our officers and all airmen for our mission needs. Now, I will emphasize that this is a very meritocratic process using nomination, selection, vectoring, and matching. And so, again, this PSDM is really going to outline how that process works. And you should read it each year because it always has different changes in it, whether you're eligible or a nominating official.
Yes, sir. We do webinars in the fall before the nomination window opens so that officers, senior raters, MPFs can ask questions about the process, but as well, they can always email our org box, which is located in our PSDM that we publish each fall.
So plenty of resources there that we are offering. And if there's not enough, reach out to us. Now, overall, it's kind of split for officers into two sections. You have IDE, Intermediate Development Education, and SDE, Senior Development Education. And then everything is fit kind of into those two groups, if you will. And so then kind of the flow is going to be, if you're eligible, you can apply, and then your senior rater can nominate you. There's a review to make sure that we have eligibility criteria met for those who are nominated. The package is reviewed, and then it goes to the Central Selection Board, a board of senior officers, boards all the records in IDE and all the boards in SDE. And then they come up with an overall order of merit, a 1 to N list. And then that gets split up and given to the different development teams. The development teams meet together and they do the vectoring and they kind of recommend which schools, 1, 2, and 3, that the officers should go to, and then also outplacement afterwards. And then that gets recombined back into a single list, and our developmental education matching board at AFPC sits down. It's an 06 board, and they go through and they, based on the number of seats available and all the inputs to the process, the members, desires, all this gets kludged together, and they figure out how to meet the requirements, and then it gets released.
Senior raters can nominate up to 40% of line of the Air Force officers, and for medical and chaplains, up to 100% of their eligible officers.
Okay. So they limit the number, which gets senior rater input. And then there is a limit because for ID and SDE, there's only so many seats available. And what is it roughly for IDE and SDE?
Yes, sir. So for IDE, it's going to be about 500 seats for line of the Air Force. And for SDE, it's historically been about 230 seats.
Okay. So good opportunities for in-person education. Of course, we're not talking about distance learning. There are more opportunities for distance learning programs beyond those, but these are the kind of the in-person seats available. And I think with the 40%, we're talking about boarding like over 2,000 officers on the IDE side and about a little bit less than that for SDE.
This year it was 1,600 for IDE, and we had just over 1,100 for SDE.
There's a policy that our Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Alvin, put out called emphasizing Air University Schools of Air Power. And so can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. So the Chief of Staff of the Air Force wants to make sure that we are sending our own officers to these schools of air power, that we're sending the highest caliber of officers to these schools. So the policy that he said specifically is that he wants, of the top third primary officers within each DT, for IDE, he wants to send 60% of the top third, and for SDE, he wants to send 33% of the top third of primary officers for each DT to schools of air power.
So something to be aware, I'll pass on as a senior rater to senior raters and to members in this process, is knowing that that's how this works. That order of merit is going to go to the DTs, and the DTs are looking at that top third to determine who they're going to push towards or vector to the Air University programs for both IDE and SDE. Now, there is a perception out there I'll just address right now, since we're talking about Air University, of, especially for SD, not getting joint outplacement. Without going into a lot of details, there are rules about joint outplacement from some of our war colleges in the NCR, National Capital Region. And so because of this bylaw outplacement, there's a perception that it affects the ability to get placed joint from other programs like Air War College, which is actually not true. When we looked at the numbers, we asked that question. Actually, it's a roughly 40% get outplaced to those joint programs. But there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just an automatic. There needs to be a requirement for the career field. We should have a vector from the DT that sends them to joint. And so there are other things that go in it based on requirements too. So are you the right career field for that position that's available coming out of school? And so we'll just say is that while there's a perception out there, the stats show that's not necessarily the case, that we're getting good joint outplacement out of our Air University programs also. Well, probably a good time to talk about something that's also now, this will be the third year executing, which is the fellowships process. But in the last 2 years, we've, at the direction of the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, we've taken fellowships and executed that selection process a different way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So ROM, or Relative Order of Merit, is taken into consideration when looking for fellowships. But what is so much more important is your background, or what your DT says that they want to outplace you with, and making sure that you can utilize what you learn in this program throughout the rest of your time in the Air Force, and to make sure that the Air Force is actually utilizing that knowledge, and that we can improve our force with these programs.
Okay. Well, I think we covered that's a lot, but it is a very complex process. But as I promised, and hopefully you've stayed listening, because if you're eligible, if you're a senior rater, you're going to want to listen to this, is there's things changing, and the PSDM is about to come out. And so we want to alert you to some changes that are coming. And so first of all, one of the big changes that our senior leaders made is to the actual decisions that you have as far as applying and opting out and declining. And so if you are eligible for IDE or SDE, you can opt in or opt out, essentially. Right? And so I would recommend to always have these conversations with your functional, with your mentors, with your senior raters. If you opt out, there's no penalty to that.
No repercussions.
No repercussions. So there's a lot of things, a lot of reasons. It could be mission, it could be family, it could be stability. If you opt in and then your senior rater nominates you, okay, and you are matched to a school, your next decision option is to accept or decline. Now, if you decline under the new policy rules, you will no longer be eligible to go to apply for in-residence at that level. So if you decline IDE in residence, you won't be eligible to go to apply for ID in residence. That's a very important change. And then some things to help with that is, in the past, we haven't really told you how many seats are available in each of the programs. Now, those change every year, but the team's going to kind of help provide historically what the rough numbers are for each program so that you know if it's a one seat only, that you're aware of that. That's going to be a very competitive one.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. So my team has worked on providing the last year's data of how many seats each program had so that these officers who are applying to these programs are preferencing, as well as the senior raters, can understand what your percentage chance of selection is. We don't actually put the percentage, but if it's one seat, it's probably a small chance that you're getting that. And I highly recommend that if you're putting 5 single-seat schools in your preferences, the chances of you getting something that you put are probably on the lower side. So maybe look at programs with a higher number of seats to increase your chances.
That's a really good point, especially now with this accept decline change, because if you don't do that, if you select 5 programs with 1 seat and you get matched to something you didn't want, if you decline, you're now no longer eligible for in-residence at that level. And so just understand kind of the dynamics. And again, the webinars, ask questions. We're here to help as we navigate through these changes to the policy and what it means. Any other changes of note for the group?
Yes, sir. So we are changing our schedule a bit. So the timeline is going to shift up more. So the PSDM will be released earlier, and the MyVector window is going to open earlier as well. And also the dual BAH policy.
Yes, that's an excellent thing that Congress and OST have provided to us to allow single rate BAH. If you leave your family where your current duty station is and you go solo to your PME program, I think it's a 4 months or longer program, but less than a year, then you get single rate and your family you can continue to receive the with dependence rate where they're located. Well, I'll just end kind of last one thing, and I appreciate your time today, and thank you very much, Emily, for this conversation. I think it's really important. We didn't cover everything, and so again, just emphasize those resources that are available, the people in the process who can help explain. Don't just think you know how it works. No matter if you're a senior rater or an eligible officer, please read the PSDM, ask questions. Things continue to change, and there's lots of information available to help. Well, that concludes our program for today. If you have a question or issue you'd like to address, look for our contact information in the comments. Next podcast, we're going to talk about officer promotion boards. From your Air Force Personnel Center, where our mission is people first, I'm General O'Donnell. Thank you for listening.
We hope you found this episode informative and helpful in taking charge of your career. Be sure to subscribe on Divots and visit our AFPC website for more resources. Have a question or topic suggestion? Reach out to us. Links to the sites and services presented in this episode of Personnel Matters, along with our website and email address, are on the podcast page. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.